coming back to the coming back kind of to the some of the things we talked about in relation to hell, and flowing from the idea of the Father, and accepting Jung and animus anima, all those things, accepting all the subtleties, accepting the things that we have within us. We come back to a question for me about a consequence of this sentimentalism, a consequence of this excessive. It's not yin, it's a kind of softness. It's not in the good sense of what yin is in the good sense. It's a sentimental, sugary sweetness that's not your friend. This sweetness, the sentimental thing, becomes then a idiot compassion, as they call it in Buddhist context, or that idea of a false compassion, a simulacrum of compassion. Oh, look at this story, isn't it terrible? And it may be, and it may not be, but it's the manipulation. Again, it's a creation of distance between the people, and it's a creation of the feeling, the sentimental sense of some story that you can identify with. It's kind of vicarious, that if you can accord or you can agree with this being some situation being terrible, then you are participating in some way, even though you're not, even though you're being used for it. And what has disappeared somewhere, and this used to be sociologically linked with the Father, was the idea of a kind of tough love, the idea of that actually a lot of things you really have to be tough, you have to be demanding, or you're not going to give the person. And it comes into also a sense of what the martial arts are about the reasons why you would want to be tough with someone in their own interest, this element. And that's something that seems to be linked to this loss of orientation, a failure to see the benefit of the yang or yang force, and where it's relevant and where you need it, because you need it presumably for structure, for definition, for crystallization, for things to function, for a functionality, and the idea that everything's okay, don't you worry, there's no consequences, whatever you feel is right, your truth is correct, that's true, there's no objective truth, whatever you feel, everything's going to be okay. And you go to the next world, they're going to say, oh yeah, it's going to be the same thing again, and you don't have to do anything, you don't have to sacrifice anything, and go girl, so that relationship between this reduction of this type of beneficial thing, which might be as simple, don't eat this, have discipline, have hierarchy, have structure, as you're talking about how you eat, for example. If you say, well, there's a difference between if I say, well, you can eat anything you want, it doesn't matter, you just whatever you enjoy, as opposed to saying, well, actually, there's consequences for this, you know what I mean, and don't take that, you shouldn't be doing that. So there is a difference in emphasis, one which I would associate with the stern-ish element of the Father. And you see this in Joyce. She talks about the river, who he personifies, Anna Olivia, coming back into the sea, and she's thinking, oh, I'm coming back to my mad, cold, fiery father, as it describes it, because the fresh water is melting in with the salt water, and it's a reflection of her dying, but of course in a cycle. So where do you see any connection between the different nature of the definition of the role of the Father, hardness, the yang, and also the demands that makes in relation to choices you make about in reality in your own life?
Well, I mean, it comes straight from the scripture. The way you walk is not the way. The name that's named is not the name. We realize that anyone acting in virtue has none whatsoever. This is the opposing deflection, the manipulation of just general acceptance of how you perceive things as a human being in your journey will be manipulated by this. Within the soft is the hard, within the hard there is soft. And this is part of that martial understanding. When you become fluid, nothing can overpower water itself. That is the true element that is all-knowing above anything and everything, and things are created from that seed. And so there we get, you're getting to the center of returning to who you are. You have toxic masculinity that we need to rid you of, because the evidence of that being able to form and shape that energy to create, we must dismantle. We must distract you. We must remove you from that potential of understanding that within the yin is the yang, within the yang is the yin. Understanding the power of that and how it gives you the all-knowing. Because just the simplicity of walking out and receiving the sun's rays on your flesh, activating what they call self-receptors on the top of your dermal layer, activating what we call the culture medium, that is the blood, that is the transporter of the pineal, pituitary, and thalamus, creating the alchemical fun factory that switches on your gene expression. And evidence of that in the last 40 years, that people realize that you are no longer a slave to your genetic disposition. You have the ability to switch on and off that with this power of this knowing, this now. And that's that energetic potential of the yang, which is the sun, which is a reflection of the mother. And so when you realize that, the chill that we get, we're constantly getting, we're oscillating through this conversation. This is the knowing. And it's not a sentimental kumbaya, feel so good about this very moment. You know, remember when your mother gave you your 5 chocolate cookies and a glass of milk, and this is what you need to stay in. This is a false sense of knowing. This is where people get trapped in their emotional content, and they get this sugary, diluted version of what reality is by not having the milk from the mother, and given the strength and the birth of yang from that energy. And that comes in that form of the masculine, of the yang, of the testosterone. And it's that oscillating effect that takes place. And just realizing that, and you realize that through the form. And that's why martial form is a misdirection from most practitioners, and it always ends badly, because they perpetrate and percolate anger as the driving force to how they express that yang energy. So they cultivate it. They then burn out the nervous system, because we referred to it briefly. And from that burning out of the nervous system, because they're expressing so much anger, thinking that will build more strength and power internally, it draws from their life force, it transmutes into their connective tissue, which resorts into energy depletion and injury, and ultimately a negative result, because these are all sort of building upon themselves, because they don't understand the relationship is always like this, and that you cannot have one without the other to find that center point. That is not that sugary, delusional state that, you know, go and watch, a tear-jerking movie of, whatever it is, and you feel emotionally attached to it. That is someone manipulating the very state that you're in. And if you don't really understand where it comes from, or how you're generating that very moment, it can be problematic. It can be detrimental to your journey, not something that makes you expansive. It doesn't connect to empathy. It's just a program that you've recorded on your recorder that you replay at will when you're being given this moment to snap into this state, which makes you emotional, and you're then manipulated. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. Well, epigenetics certainly is an interesting area, and I've been interested in that, and I have a great belief in the ability of the mind to and philosophy to be applied to override what people used to see as determined forces. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the link between techniques of struggle and martial arts, and we've we touched on that before, and the idea of the warrior, and also which links into the previous conception of the male figure, and how the nexus between that, and in particular where I'm thinking about that is in relation to the necessity going forward of the spiritual warrior, and that this is the real interesting element, because we are fighting a battle, as I see it, for humanity itself. That's what I believe is at stake, and I believe it can be lost very, very quickly. We're only talking about a matter of years that the human species will be taken over by technology. Yuval Noah Harari is kind of suggesting that it happened during the pandemic, that it's the implication being that biometric systems were set up that will be the implication that is total control. I mean, he's quite clear about that, and you may read a subtext into that about things having been inserted into the body. But irrespective of that, looking at all the patterns, looking at the technology, it's clear that the way forward for governance is the insertion of nanotechnology into your body, most likely surreptitiously. And it's all part of it could happen in a number of ways. For example, people are talking about the chemtrails. It can be done that way from the skies. In fact, I talked about the Virgin Mary, the Generatrix project. Generatrix was a project in the 50s in America, where they used weather balloons as surveillance means. Now they're using weather balloons to distribute from the stratosphere sensors wherever they want to do it. So we know that smart dust is being spread. Now, there is a theory, and I believe there's kind of evidence that we're undergoing a massive spread of smart dust. Now, by smart dust, we mean very, very small sensors that are spread all over the place. They're not detectable, not perceptible. They're nanotechnology at the moment, maybe come pico size, 1 billion but they're nanotechnology we're talking about, and also technology that can go into the body. And when you have things in the body that can monitor emotions and the things and how a person behaves and monitor behavior, and when that's linked through crystal structures, whatever, in the body with external systems, the technological infrastructure that's growing, then the human has no freedom, and the human can also be controlled by manipulation. The worry is not of massive competition by AI in a conscious way. It's of low-level control on a mass level of the human, and that if some of those scenarios are true, and that's kind of the story of the singularity, which is calculated, in my view, to come into being 2,000 years after the death of Christ. It's a deliberate saying, we're burying this old story now. We're burying this stream because it's given a sense of, despite the criticism people make, it's given us our sense of who we are in individuality in the West, and we're burying that. We can't have that anymore. And the 2,000 years after the death of Christ will be a nice time to have the singularity, meaning the total control of humans. Nothing got to do with in AI consciousness or not. If that's true, if any of that is true, even remotely true, we have then the people that oppose it, and they have planned all kinds of scenarios to make sure that any historical resistance system will not work. Every scenario has been planned for that. They planned a long time ago. They know about the history of these terrorist organizations, and because they often made them up themselves. They often created them themselves. They were involved in them. They were involved in every paramilitary organization in Ireland, for example, the authorities. Look, it's very, very interesting. People don't question the peace process or the timing of the peace process in Ireland. Peace process ended a couple of years before Britain went out traveling the world again in military conflict and getting involved in external wars. And do you think that that's not connected, that they didn't turn off the tap when it suited them? Because otherwise you wouldn't go out again when you had to dedicate people close at home. There was anyway. So with the growth of the military-industrial complex, who have making clear that neural warfare is ongoing, the fifth generation warfare is war against their own population, then it puts a premium on a new type of spiritual warrior, which is, I say, non-violent. I think that it has to be a mass movement. It's not going to use the traditional ways. It's about a real engagement, philosophically, spiritually, consciously, with the forces, in an advocacy as well, to explain what we are really about, which is at the level, I believe, coming through the perennial flood, at the top, especially where we need imagination, regeneration, dialogue, mutual support, to begin to reframe our conception of the world and explaining what spiritual consciousness is about and who we are. So we need a new model of the spiritual warrior, which it may embody elements or lessons from the previous idea of the warrior, but it doesn't apply to the new context. They will look and feel different, men and women, in relation to this struggle, and they will form bonds between themselves. By definition, any organized movement will fail. No organized movement can deal with what's coming. It has to be without structure. Actually, it has to be through resonance. These things have to be actually implemented. It has to be through coming into accord that we can have movement, as I said, non-violent, in order to unite, to evolve, to move to the next stage, which is part of the problem. These problems are created by our failure to spiritually evolve. So I was wondering where you see the spiritual warrior. And I know about your interest, and you shared it with me in relation to actual, whether it be prize fighting. A lot of people don't. They look askance at that, but I've always found it interesting. So I find the UFC interesting, and the various manifestations of wider kind of ideas and techniques of interaction. How do you see the spiritual warrior and the modus operandi or your instincts about how people of goodwill and who are spiritually or seeking to be spiritually evolved will unite in relation to this common foe of all spiritual people?
Well, the groundswell is huge. I had a conversation with a couple of scientists that read Schumann resonance out of Russia and Italy. And, the consensus is just the general commandeering of a human being's brainwave is generally, the Earth's resonance is about 7.8, right? Right now, if you take a snapshot, it's about 7.8 hertz, which keeps you in that brainwave state of about, a theta alpha sort of like state, which gives you the ability to be highly creative and access your unconscious. Now, that's just what happens if you just step out of bed and you're not commandeered by your environment and any other things that can be problematic within the human condition. You can tap into that as a tuning fork and a barometer right now. Now, what was really interesting is there is evidence, and they're speaking on it, the artificial manipulation of that resonance going up to a 12 to 18 hertz. Now, what does that mean to all the people listening right now? It means that there's a commandeering of your general state that would put you in high beta, highly potentially manipulative and manipulated and anxious, running on the emotions that would put you into a rat in a wheel sort of like scenario. And you run wild. And now, from my instinct, my teachers, Lutzu specifically, has made it very clear that he started talking about this at the beginning of the year, 12 to 24 months, the resonance is going to rise to a 40 to 60 hertz state frequency. Now, what does that mean? That means that we have some highly conscious potential for anyone that is operating in planet Earth right now. Highly potential. That means when you're in gamma frequency of that amplitude, you're 100% conscious and you can access all things at once. That means your conscious and unconscious process. Now, depending upon your energetic potential, what you do from that in relation to this realm is for you to decide. But in essence, what that means is there is an upswell, a revolution that we're looking towards, that is, let the good times roll, not the negative, not the lower frequency. We're talking about a realization of your true potential returning to the mother. And that was also reiterated and reinforced and validated from the Schumann resonance scientist that was reading it for me. And she's like, yep, this is what's taking place. This is what's going to happen. I'm seeing all the signs of where this is going for the next 12 to 24 months. And so the spiritual warrior is gathering from the spoken word that you and I share, that gives them the curiosity to become a seeker, to open themselves up to that greater knowing and returning to who they are through the information that you and I share with them, that becomes not just words, but it becomes something that they can associate with the feeling, the knowing of returning to who they are. And it's not that milky, sugary, diluted misdirection that we were speaking about earlier, which comes from these parasites that are entered into your mind, that are commandeering your thoughts. You become very, very clear, very, very coherent. And then the spiritual warrior within you is revealed. It's evoked. It becomes clear. Does that make any sense?
Yes, yeah. And associated with that, I mean, it's clear if you believe in some of the prophecies from Garabandal, it's not recognized by the church, this apparition in northern Spain, but I think it's very interesting. But we have this idea, it's not just there, of illumination of conscience, where everybody in the world, and this is another thing about the Virgin Mary apparitions, it applies to everybody. It's not just the Catholics, but they would have this, I would describe as a near-death experience, where they have this life review, and this is an implication of a divine intervention in the world. It's a very interesting phenomenon. It's often associated, or has an association with darkness, which again is often associated with the sun, the movement of the sun, if you like, the Father, and its influence on the earth and its influence on volcanoes, etc., which is the big thing.
That resonance that I was saying, that was being artificially manipulated, would bring us to the nanotechnology that you're speaking of. It's happening. It's happening right now. There is there's a manipulation of the state of the human being.
My view is that the promise revealed through the prophecies is that there will be a divine intervention, and the divine intervention is caused by the exceeding of the role of humanity through this Promethean, where it goes so far that it interferes with the total creation. And I mean, it follows on. You see this in stories of Atlantis and technology destroying and being destroyed, etc., and cultures that fall because of it. And that's why Francis Bacon had or purported to build a new Atlantis. You know, they were going to learn, they were going to recover the Garden of Eden. They were going to go back to the Garden of Eden, equating sin with ignorance, and therefore science would bring them back, and they would be godlike. And this is the idea. And they would also be able to build the Tower of Babel or Babel, and then they would be all powerful. This is the belief that they have, and people dismiss the Christian views, but the dominant class believe in these things, but they want to invert it. So you cannot ignore these themes that they're engaging in.
Well, you see, that's a very interesting observation, which we may have touched on in the last conversation, is this undertone, overtone, this idea everyone's gravitating to Thoth as the new coming of, God, Jesus. That's actually, through my own experience, quite an ominous energy. And then on top of that, then this repeating of the Atlantis and all these other things that are mystical and magical and baubles of distraction. Yes. And it's becoming a common theme, right? So when you start to see, the charge we're getting right now, that validation of knowing is that this theme is getting bigger and bigger, and more people are buying into it, and more people are being manipulated by it, and that's all they want to hear. And so it's quite common for, the person to start channeling the Palladians and aliens and all these other things. And next minute I have a YouTube channel and 100,000 people are listening to me. And that is the misdirection, my dear brother. That is really what is going to be the undoing from my perspective, from my observation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we take the Marian apparitions, the first Marian apparition, again, is legendary, this one, but it happened when she was alive to James in Spain. So it's like a bilocation, So this tradition of which are very familiar with your tradition of projecting yourself, of appearing. And there is another line, I forget which verse it is, where they talk about the Tao or the sage appearing. There's a manifesting, and this is a similar to the apparitions as well, or I saw it as similar.
We call it Shen projection.
Yeah. But also, and one of the lines about the Tao appearing. And in your translation, I think you used the word appearing. So it reminded me of the apparition sense of this is of the higher forces actually literally appearing. But we had all this long tradition, which you don't have, for example, with Prometheus. He doesn't appear to anybody because he's not real. He's a fiction. He's a projection. He is a projection. But you do have massive amount of this evidence of this figure who is consistent with, as I was seeking to explain, a conception which we can see in Taoism of a eternal divine, a representation, a healing mother for, there's and some of the evidence, like in Fatima, with 70,000 people seeing the movement of the sun as predicted, even people that didn't, etc. I mean, the evidence is quite hard to rebut. And then at the same time, you have all these things sneaking in, parts of the UFOs and parts of these star people. And I know about the histories and all that. But often the people that are presenting them are very hostile to any actual tradition that the people are involved in. So when you're engaging in your tradition, you're linking into something that real people were engaging in for hundreds and thousands of years. And it's a similar thing in relation to, say, Catholicism. It's a similar thing in relation to Irish cultural and pagan tradition. It goes back. There's a lineage which is there. So this lineage cannot be made out clearly for a lot of the other things. And also, it's easier for people because they're brought up in this science fiction thing. It's easier for them to be sold a story about beings out on some other planet, irrespective of the fact that despite all the things they say about how many people are out there or many beings, they've never actually found them. You know, this not saying they're not, but I mean really in relation to the interrelationship. So they can believe that thing. They can believe in UFOs because they're physical things, and you know, people can see them, and again, Jesus said, "Blessed is those who believe without seeing." That is referring to your inner eyes and your possibility of seeing what reality is in a spiritual sense, as opposed to needing materialist physical vindication. So I'm hugely skeptical that some of these are 100%, in my view. Some of them are mind operations. Some of them will be sponsored, some of them will be encouraged, some of them will be suggested. Some people will be misled, some people are manipulative. Now, I've no doubt that there are genuine people doing certain things, but you probably will never hear of them things. And there are people, and it is curious that in a number of the very interesting interactions that I find more credible, say with extraterrestrials, this woman comes, the lady, which is very similar to the Virgin Mary. Now, there are books that believe that Fatima and all that was a UFO, and it was. Now, I don't. It's just it's very consistent. There's an overlap, but the specificity of the message, recurrent message, it doesn't fit in. And the interesting thing within the Catholic Church is that the Virgin Mary is criticizing the priests and the cardinals and the bishop. It's one of the most critical streams going back to the 1800s, and saying that some of the cardinals, bishops, and priests are on the road to perdition. That was said, you know, in the 1840s, according to the prophecies. It was said in the 1960s. So it's not necessarily one that's supporting the church, and it's criticized, as a lot of the female mystics used to criticize. What I was thinking about, it may sound trite to people that are not interested in these things, and generally, I'm a critic of all the attention spent on sport and all that, and I've cut out the most of it. I'm just curious about this phenomenon of fighting and prize fighting, as I said before, because I've been interested in the family, and it goes through, and now the manifestation is UFC. And one thing that I found very interesting, a little thing, it's kind of a counterintuitive truth, is that I'm watching these guys that are getting paid to comment on, you know, that study. The job is to know about these fires, to know what they're doing. They've done these practices for years themselves. It's really remarkable. That's all they do. They get up in the morning till they go to sleep is read about these things and make videos and talk and discuss or train themselves. And if you look at a number of the champions, say in the UFC recently, what they share is that the people cannot understand what they're doing. And not only can they not understand what they're doing, they say that what the technique of the people are doing are bad or don't fit into the plan. Now, this is a very, very interesting phenomenon. It's similar to, I could make the analogy with the rise of Trump and Conor McGregor. It's a very interesting story. Now, forget about the politics. I don't want to get into that, because I start getting abuse from people. Oh, you support it. But I'm not interested in that, because I think it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I'm talking about what these things represent in the collective psyche. So the example, you had this fellow Sean Strickland who became a champion, and they're saying, well, his technique is, it's something we can't explain, or we don't know what he's doing. And now, I've been very interested in certain techniques or certain elements of the martial arts, and one which is not mainstream is 52 blocks, which is a disputed African American compilation of skills. Some, some say they learned them off the videos of Kung Fu, and they integrated them into the traditional things. They were used in prison. They were about how you would fight when you're in limited circumstance, how you might fight in a phone box, how you might fight with your hands behind your back, how you might fight with only one hand. And a lot of it is based on the defensive mechanism. So a lot of the things we see in boxing and dirty boxing, and the use of the shoulders, use of the arms, were derived from these. And your man, this guy seems to me to be using things. So you put your elbow up to stop a punch, for example, and it's not nice if you connect with the thing. So I'm saying, well, these guys are looking at that fella and they don't know what he's doing. And he hasn't said he's doing it, but you wouldn't say you're doing it. And then you have this other fella, Dricus du Plessis from South Africa, who's a middleweight. And everyone says that his technique is bad, but he's never been defeated. He's now that world champion. He's never been defeated. And they can't explain it, and it doesn't fit in. And these guys are getting paid for it. Now, there's a clear context for me, because he comes from the South African tradition, and the South African rugby team is notoriously the hardest team that you come across. I knew one of the rugby captains, another interesting story of South Africa. And these are really hard in their disposition. They're really, really tough. And they're, you cannot underestimate. If you knew what they did, how they played rugby, you would not underestimate their fighting things. And they're saying, but this can't happen. He's no style. And he's winning all the time. And the experts got him wrong, and they nearly got him wrong every time, because they won't acknowledge some feature about him. Now, where I'm going with this is that it reveals to me that institutions become blinded to the forces that become good at changing, at the change makers. They can't understand when a change maker, a new type of warrior, applies imagination, technique, dedication, discipline in a different way. And it's the same thing with for me, Trump and McGregor. If you look at you can parallel their rise was very, very similar. They two kind of red-haired figures. Trump's mother was born on a Scottish island, speaking Irish, Gaelic speaking. McGregor has Gaelic speaking in his family, or he went to Irish speaking school, red hair. They're both the kind of warrior archetype, the chieftain thing. And then, so the people who were against opposing him strategically were treating him as something he wasn't. If you like, Trump, he was a chieftain figure who would, as McGregor did, wrap the flag around him and therefore get the support of a group who weren't going to analyze him in the way that they thought he would be analyzed. They didn't care about things. If they saw that he would, or they believed he would die for the cause, well, then they would die for it. And it was a similar thing with McGregor. And they seem to fail to spot something about the basic archetypal and even geographical origin of that cultural matrix, which also suggests to me about the nature of the oppositional forces in future in the spiritual world. It's not going to be this, oh yeah, well, I think, and everything is going to be, and that's sent. There's going to be different types of spiritual leaders. They won't be talking about these guys out in some other star system. These won't be helping. They'll be very, very here and now. It'll be very, very clear about what its objectives is, and that's going to be that's going to be the challenge for the people at the top when they begin to see the correspondence, when they begin to have a robust analysis, when they begin to understand themselves what the tactics and the strategic geopolitical game is, when they have reached that level that they understand, which is difficult, the totality of interaction of economic, commercial, financial, political, philosophical forces, and they understand it. And then their process of intellectual and spiritual resistance begins to happen. There's going to have to be disruptions in relation to how the spiritual manifest, or how the manifestation of that spiritual resistance happens. It's just I don't know if that made any sense to you. It may not have. It may have been a few.
Well, they do. They go into a stereotype. They look at it and go, okay, well, for example, you use Trump. He's an example. They think he's just an abrasive, rude individual because he's been panned as that across the board. With any sort of news media, yet the insight and his ability to create many things throughout his career, not his personality. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what he's able to see in relation to creating and sustaining and maintaining the foundations of this country is a whole different ballgame. And what's the seed of one of the things that he reads? The one book that he always talks about. Did we talk about this? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
You know what his one book is that he refers to as the reason why he always is
the power of positive thinking, was it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, here's the other analogy, and here's the again the interesting correspondences. This is why, when you're dealing with kind of similar phenomenon. Again, I put aside all the political stuff or political analysis. So McGregor relied on The Secret.
There you go. You can't make this stuff up.
And it's kind of, if you like, kind of popular philosophy or whatever like that. But take the thing seriously and apply it. It's clear. I think his sister was very, very big into it. So you had the same thing again. You had this same belief in the power of physical manifestation that both of them had. So they have that similar interest in the blingy thing, you know what I mean? Similar abrasiveness, similar disrespect and also there was timing about this. The timing of it, or the parallels when you look at it, even they both go through a trial of the same process. You begin to say, well, either this is scripted or this is a classic archetypal correspondence happening. It's ridiculous. If you look at the parallels between even this thing about the red hair and all this, people, the orange man, but this is a reference as well to the Highlanders and the Scottish and the Irish and the Celts and all. This is a much deeper thing but they're not actually understanding it. I know the skin thing and all that, but there is deeper connotations to it. As now, certainly one part to say, well, this is actually a script. In both cases, the same script. Defeat an enemy, overcoming and surprise and coming from nowhere and all this kind of stuff, not being the type of person. Or there's also some archetypal correspondence that actually, is real about this. This is the interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but you take it down to the simplicity of freedom, mentally, emotionally, physically, and you look at what people define as democracy here in America, or a republic, the understanding of that, the foundations of that when this country was, conceived and founded by the Constitution, and how that is really the only thing holding this country together, and quite frankly, probably holding the world together, is the hope that can still be maintained. And if that is maintained, then all the other lower frequency stuff will just fall away because there's still evidence of this connection. And so when you look at someone in that mindset, and you look at like the animal kingdom, you have fighters, you have MMA fighters, you have these people go to these sort of institutions for one reason. They can legally hurt people and get paid for it. That's why they do it. But those people also are released into the wild. They're released into civilization, and the evidence of being able to curtail and maintain some type of normalcy for the majority of other people. So I use the analogy of the litter of puppies, and the puppies are feeding from the mother's teat, and the one puppy that doesn't get the food, guess what happens? It dies. And within the instinct of the construct of the human survival mechanism, they fall into that whole Darwin's theory of evolution, survival of the fittest. So you're now mimicking this. This is what's being self-evident within today's society, and it hasn't left it. We could mention this to anybody, and they go, "I've heard that before. I understand it. I know it. This is how I live my life." And so, from a being a scholar yourself, being a barrister, being an attorney, you understand that laws are the only things that can govern the majority of people, because it is seated within fear. But those people that we're speaking of within MMA, with it, they're detached from empathy. They're on their own sort of like state of commandeered by certain other energies, and some of them can be all knowing and be aligned with God, and some of them are just completely offline and removed from that empathy. And then the construct of this, humanistic response of survival is survival of the fittest, kill or be killed. These type of like mindset that has been constantly brainwashed into our human history, all the way back to those seeds that were quite evident within the Darwin theory. And now you have people living that way, and that's their survival mechanism. That's how they get it.
In relation to the deeper element of what's going on with this thing about prize fight, and again, looking at it as a phenomenon, which we're trying to understand, prize fighting is big in empires, and probably the end of empires or changes in society, because as with the gladiators in Rome, it's feeding stuff to the public, us in this case, although I'm trying to learn things from it when I'm looking at it as well. As I said before, Tony Dempsey in the 20s, before the crash, because it represents an ability to a safety valve. There's some assumption that the person is involved in this thing, that they're exercising their aggressive things. So it's vicarious, sentimental sense of struggle. And it's very, very good for dissipating energy. And of course, both Trump and McGregor share an incredible focus on materialism in a ridiculous, absurd way, over the top, ridiculous, unhealthy, whatever, absolute love of all the garishness, like the King Midas thing, which this suggests a spiritual vacuum, and is certainly not a model, but it's certainly not a model for anything. So in a certain sense, there is a distractive force which pulls the attention and channels the attention away from what is the spiritual warrior, and how does the spiritual warrior work. Mahatma Gandhi is not going to work in the same way. The Dalai Lama, it doesn't seem to be, in my view, changing the thing. The spiritual leaders are not talking to the young people, and many of them are more interested in spectacular things, as you've said, about the different star systems in the galaxy. And this is the real challenge, that people are interested in these things. Now, I know a lot of people trying to do things about trying to help, and a lot of it ultimately comes down to the inspiration of other individuals at an individual level. And I believe that there will be this mass of spiritual warriors. They won't look like Trump or McGregor in relation to how they manifest in the world. Both of them also were very big into all the injections and all that. So it was another way the system has shown that it can use these supposedly countercultural figures for its own purposes, and both of them are very supportive. So it's very, very interesting issues about how we are manipulated by the matrix, that we think we're seeing certain things, or we interpret in a particular way, and it leads to other conclusions. In relation to, but even on the issue you mentioned about the Constitution, here's the difficulty with that. The Constitution came out of a particular matrix that existed, which assumed a superior being. So if you look at all the great scientists, if you go back to Gassendi and Descartes and Bacon even, and we go back or later to Robert Boyle and Newton. All of them, or Copernicus. I mean, they were working in the church. They all believed in a divine force. Even when we come to Machiavelli, he said that you couldn't have a society without a belief in God. You couldn't do it. So most constitutions, most legal systems claim authority from God. The codes of Hammurabi, the oldest legal system we have from Babylon, he got them from God. This divine influence, authority, the claim to authority is in everything. But with the movement of scientism, the attempt has been to dissolve any belief in that system, and with that, you remove the claim to a higher source. So you remove the idea of the person as a reflection of the divine. You remove the claim to rights being higher than law, imprescriptible, inalienable. No, there's no such thing if you take away the higher force, because the presupposition was that there was a higher force. So when you cut out the idea of belief in God, you also cut out the possibilities of using these rules to find commonality and to find common framework. And now, with the changes in the United States, as it's intended to be at a federal level, it's intended to be part of the new world system. So it can't exist in the same way. It's obvious. It's the intent is to make it collapse. It's clear that even from within the
So brazen, so obvious. It's like we're not even
I
like
mean,
we're not
but
even
even
contemplating. It's like it's in broad daylight.
yeah, and even the idea of contingency, which is there from Donald Rumsfeld and all these guys, they prepared contingency, which means no government, no Senate, no a hand-picked group of people run. That's there already, and an army, a new army. It's easy to now recruit a new army in all the Western countries because of the changes in migration, and the preparation of prison space for dissidents. So unfortunately, one could take a very bleak picture because, and this goes back to the questions about the father, the rule, the benefits of sternness, if you like. You can't do things without some consequences. So rules, systems work because there are consequences. Even with machines, there are consequences of particular rules and software. But in social society, you can't have any games without rules. So when you begin to remove this, so if we say we'll play a game of golf, but we can make up the rules as we go along, you lose something. It can't work. And when we see as well that it's a question, I probably said this to you as well before, that in relation to some of the new age, whatever, there's a problem with the exoteric rule, not the esoteric thing, not the interior attitudes. Well, there may be as well, but what are the consequences? Okay, you believe in this thing. Well, without all the difficult areas, do you believe it's bad to steal? And some people won't be able to answer those questions, that are claiming to be spiritual. Now that's nothing got to do with Christianity or Judaism or whatever. These are principles that exist in, whatever way people want to change them. They're necessary in relation to the conduct of society, unless you want chaos. But a lot of people do want chaos. So there's also a failure for people to accept even minimal restraints, because all those things seem old-fashioned. They're restraining, and what they interpret freedom is license to do things. So anything which restricts them is any yang kind of balancing force is rejected, and hence you don't get the balance. You get the negative aspects, I suppose, of yin energy, or when it goes beyond its healthy dynamic. So there's a great problem. And this is right through the school system, right through sports, right through is the disrespect for the benefit of rule, which is again which recognizes the utility of cooperation or the benefit of cooperation, assuming that they're good rules. So it's a real challenge. Also the politicization of a legal system. When I used to, a lot of lawyers used to be able to distinguish between politics and law and say, well, this is a legal system and this is not necessarily. I don't want to over glamorize it. It's I wouldn't overstate it either, because they made it up as they went along as well. But there was some sense, at least, or some pretension that was the case, that these were the rules and we'll follow the rules even if it goes against our interest. But that's really gone now. So we have the politicization of the legal system, and that can only lead to collapse. You can't go once that has happened. The basis of your society is gone. The notional social contract, which is not there, is gone. So but again, that suits the agenda that wants the chaos, so we can bring the order with artificial intelligence and digital intelligence. It might give you a taste of criminal gangs, a bit of Sharia in some places, just to show you, the difference and the systems that you can get on the way to the lovely digital system they're planning to give you with digital currency and the insert in your body, because it's all for your own good. They are protecting you. And that's another idea. If we go back to the earliest prayer in the Virgin Mary, it used the word praesidium, as in protection. All protection now is not spiritual protection. So in your practices, I'm sure you invoke protection for yourself by benign forces against negative forces. But now protection is mechanical, military, industrial, the presidio, and there's even, again, biotech companies of that name, and there's no idea of spiritual protection. So we have to re-emphasize the validity, the necessity, the reality of spiritual consciousness, the reality of that duality you talked about earlier on, about different forces, and realize that what's happening out in the world is the creation of principalities in reflection of darker principalities.
Yeah, I mean, that's been happening around the world for so long. Disarming you spiritually, disarming you physically, has been on the agenda. This is how you get completely detached. And the last hope is someone having at least a physical ability to protect themselves, if that's all there's left. And by dismantling that, by attempting to take that away, is evident throughout the world. And unfortunately, for the powers to be, that hasn't happened here. And the insinuation that the idea that it ends in a bad ending is just the manipulation of the mind in of itself. It's like you're just leading someone down there. You're preloading the outcome. It's like if I take someone, for example, I go down to the strip, and I taught my kids hypnosis when they were young, because it's good to understand how easy it is to enter someone's unconscious, which is literally all I need to do is have my attention, intention. That's it. And if I'm in the same space as you, your thoughts can be my thoughts very quickly. It's not difficult to create that sense of knowing. Now, the manipulation is most of the manipulators out there are fallen bad students of NLP, other mind manipulative sort of techniques, using linguistics and images to commandeer your attention and in basically impregnate this parasite into your mind, and then you believe you're having those thoughts. So when I go down on the strip and I take my kids out and we play street magic, and we walk up to someone who's having a good time, they're having drinks, whatever, and my kids are like, well, I want to practice, because I teach them remote viewing, the power of prayer, their connection with the Tao is second to none, and then understanding the facets of this mind manipulation that take place within the conscious and unconscious is critical. So entry-level stuff is your brainwaves, your state that you're in. You can enter anyone's unconscious within a few moments. And so you go in there and you go, oh, I'll go down to the strip, have a conversation. Would you like to experience bliss? And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. And their friends will get their camera out and they'll step back. And it's like, you know, you've seen the street magic with David Blaine or whatever. Someone hypnotizes someone. And the second they say that, I go sleep. And they pass out standing up. And their friends are freaking out going, oh, they're videotaping this. And I'm like, this is how quickly it happens. Now, anyone that wants to feed you the idea that this is not possible unless it's with your permission is a liar. This is an absolute lie. Now, that's where the moral compass comes in. That's where the connection with empathy and the understanding of that theme where you are returned to the mother, that primordial knowing of who you really are. And this is where politicians and using these sort of manipulative tools commandeer your attention, commandeer your state of mind, commandeer your emotional state instantaneously. If you've ever heard a politician, the first thing you need to do is walk away. So what is a classic example? You know, two of the biggest failed apprentices of Tony Robbins, who's the godfather of NLP. Do you know who two of them are? Barack Obama and Gavin Newsom. Two failed, very failed. But you listen to them, and most politicians have a certain. It's what they call within if you're talking about psychosis therapy. If you're talking to a therapist, a hypnotist, they call it pacing and leading. Right? You are familiar with these things. So it's like, I have a dream. Of a future. Now, what happens is when you get someone's attention and you speak like that, and then you start moving your hands, you're actually crossing the sections of the actual brain. And so you now have this little ability. You create rapport, what they call a psychodynamic loop. All you have to do, you know how you start with that? Is do this.
Yeah.
And you want to manipulation instantaneously, have someone go to reach out to shake your hand. And you do it autonomously. And then you know what the next step is? They just need you to comply twice. And with your eyes open, they can enter your unconscious and feed you everything you need. And then if you have someone who's an NLP manipulator, all they need to do is touch you, and it buries that seed deeper into your unconscious through the dermal layer. We talked about the self receptors that are on the dermal layer that activate in the nervous system. All these things are taking place. These people need to understand this, James, that it's at a level that is second to none, and all you have to do is turn your TV on. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, well, absolutely. I've studied them. I knew a hypnotist years ago, and I used to ask him about use of television and hypnosis. This was kind of a long time ago. I was really, really interested, and especially neuro-linguistic program, which is described in terms of magic by the people that wrote it, by Bandler and
but they want to call it.
And I mean, the most remarkable example, and this is not I think adequately appreciated, is yes, we can. You know, the Obama one. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. You know, unbelievable to a bunch of nonsense and meaningless statement. Yes, we can. What, invade Iraq or fill in anything? You know, but where did that come from? It's interesting. In the film, The Nutty Professor, they have a scene where the guy, the professor who becomes big and you know and changes, he's sitting at home, he's watching television, and they have he's watching a slimming program. You know, all these programs in America where they have a group of people doing some exercises to lose weight, and you have someone leading them, and they're saying something like, "Yes, we can. Yes, we can." And that was before. And I actually think there's some deeper, not only an NLP, but a deeper taking the mickey out of the public in some of these slogans that were we're showing the contempt for. Now, in defense of some politicians, my grandfather was a politician, and members of parliament, my uncles, and they came from working class, poor background into it. But that their type of politician was changed in the 90s. You won't get them anymore because the systems have been taken over. There was two things you made me. You would agree that there is a destabilization, but apart from whatever the mind, you would agree that there is a destabilization, an attempt to destabilize the Western world, independently of any perception of it.
Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify.
I want to reiterate that I'm not a fan. If I come across people that are consciously, using NLP, it's never for the betterment of mankind.
Yeah.
It's always. I'm like, come on, all of a sudden my personality will be very front and forward and very clear. You're a manipulator. You're looking to manipulate an outcome, and it's designed for that purpose. You're not attempting to help someone access their PTSD and all that kind of stuff. It's just fluff and bells and whistles. It's there. People need to be aware of it. They need to realize that it's happening. It's happening on a daily basis. Even marketing in of itself, they've known about this level of access for hundreds, thousands of years, because ritual, the depth of that, and prayer is within the inaudible and audible expression, that connection that you have with the higher self. But they're not going to higher self. Hypnosis is not higher self stuff. This is not what James and I are talking about. This is very low level stuff. It's entry level stuff just to access the conscious and unconscious part of your mind. And it's now,
before I forget, I agree. Now, you mentioned about prayer. Now, this is a thing that's very difficult for people to understand. I know it sounds strange, but it's very difficult for people to understand. And if you're talking about spiritual warfare, now, and if we take the argument, at least, that in Europe and in other places, in South America, all around the world, that the Virgin Mary represents, she is the force that will destroy this. This is what the argument is. The feminine manifest in the Virgin Mary is the force predicted in Genesis that will destroy this snake. I wouldn't oversimplify this, as I explained what I think it is. So, well, you say, well, hold on, with this kind of self-effacement, grace thing, and the key spiritual weapons in this that are presented to you in all the apparitions is prayer. Now, the skeptic will say, hold on a second. You have all these. So let me do the skeptic to you. So you have all these guys, they're using machines, they're using manipulation, they've been studying the nervous system for hundreds of years, going back to, frogs and electricity and Aldini, Galvani, going up to all this kind of nervous system. Leonard Huxley, the other guy studying and eugenics, and the other Huxley studying the nervous system, and they came up with it. And this is what Aldous was talking about. It all comes to control of your nervous system, physiological. And they're going to do that. They're going to implement a system, which the cybernetic system, the nerves of the world, and you're integrated into your nerves. It's physiological, not even got to do with being able to resist it. And they're going to force you through war, famine, biotech. They're going to compel you. They're going to cause famines. They're going to destroy the world. You know that they're making 3D printed foods now from plastic, which has been fed to yeast, and I mean that's reality. So, and in that, you're telling me, say, that the Virgin Mary recommends or says that praying the Rosary is going to solve this problem. That prayer is going to fight against this evil. How can that possibly be? That's incomprehensible, ridiculous. It just can't work. It's wishful thinking. It shows that it's wrong. It shows that it's part of this system to control you. It's a cod. It's been used to keep you down. I don't believe, if I put the argument, I don't believe that prayer could ever change anything. Can you, or what would you say to that, or what would you say to someone from your own tradition, and to convince them, or to explain to them, especially to explain, because I have no idea what it is, what prayer is?
Right. Well, I mean, you being subject to how you perceive your reality is everything to do with the human condition. What we speak of is in the construct of that. Hypnosis, manipulation, mind manipulation is all within that construct. When you tap into the Mother Mary, when you tap into the Tao, God, Buddha, this is not from this world. This is a perfect example of perfection. And how you access that is from your belief system. And your belief system is being commandeered by being removed. I always tell people, it's like, if you beat someone, and where I have my temple and where I live, I'm surrounded by Mormons, Jehovah Witness, Christians, Catholics. I'm with my people. I'm with people that believe in something. That is the very distraction that you have as a human being, distracted by the power of your knowing. And that prayer is that communication, and you bring it here. And it is undeniable when you attune yourself to that. So if you understand that you unravel this, you're a tuning fork. You can be manipulated by the limited human condition, or you can realize through your own journey, through your own seeking, that the fundamental difference, because it still comes back to how you are feeling, that when you are in prayer, or when you are in some type of hypnotic state, it's not even in the same ballpark. It doesn't even come into the same category, but you must experience that first as a seeker. So I would always tell you that it starts with the belief system. And so how do you obtain them? Well, that doesn't mean anything. You're just talking gobbledygook. The self-evident realization of that is where you start, because human beings are skeptical, they're introspective, they're analytical. So you must start with, how do you obtain a level of prayer that will communicate with God, that will show you fundamentally in this construct that there is presence of God? It has to come from a ritual. It has to come from a belief system. It has to come from a practice. And you'll know that you have the seed of that just in your curiosity, that you're meant to be on that path. Everyone is meant to be on the path. When someone tells you, oh, you don't have the gifts, and this is your gift, and this is mine, and that in of itself is a lie. Everyone has the ability to access God and to be at one with the profound knowing of this. Yet there are these hurdles that people tend to have to jump over. But I know, and if someone's in front of us, our messaging is to help them remember, is to help them return. It comes from the belief system. Well, the belief system, I don't know. I go to church and I pray to God and nothing happens. My life is miserable. Well, let's look closer at that. You're still really not showing evidence of complete surrender, which returns to the sacrifice, returns to being at one, returns to the selfless servitude. So this comes back to your relationship with that belief system. And when people detach themselves from the ritual, which is so, in my opinion, the most important thing, is to have that ritual so that you are able to attune yourself to Buddha, God, Tao, whoever it is, whatever it is, knowing that that is fundamentally the truth, and it will be shown to you in your experience. And so there's a process. If someone was to argue that with me, first I would start with what that means to them and why they've disconnected from their belief system. and then give them an opportunity through an experience within that same breath of something greater than what they believed was possible, and show it to them. As it doesn't get any clearer than this. Let me show you what I'm speaking of. And all of a sudden, and I think there's also this disconnection from their energetic potential, and realizing that they're only tuned into what you would refer to as the sugary sweet sort of simulated version of some sort of like sensation, not the true belief, the true essence, the true knowing of that feeling of God that is undeniable. It doesn't come anywhere close to a sentimental feeling of a chocolate cupcake when I was 5, when you are in the presence of God. And so being detached from that emotional state, and that normally comes from an energetic potential, and that from a Taoist perspective is the lung channel, is always disconnected from most people. So that lung channel will be disconnected. They won't have the sensitivity that's necessary for them to be very clear, not deluded with this sentimental little captured moments of wonderment because of their past. When they access that lung channel and it's turned on, that's why the alchemy is so important from a Taoist perspective, is to be in complete awareness of that energetic potential. And it's 100%. It's not 50, it's not 20, it's not 30. It's not a distorted version of it. It's undeniable, as you and I both know.
And you reminded me, of course, of when you're talking about the appropriate attitude, which is in most traditions is to be like a child, which also answers the point that you make about casting aside the intellectualism. And that was I think I mentioned to you before, or may have mentioned that I was at Garabandal and I met one of the girls that saw this or saw the apparitions. Well, she's in her 70s now. And I kissed the cross, or she presented it to me and blessed me with it. And I kissed it. This is one of the crucifixes that, according to the story, it was kissed by the Virgin Mary. Now, this is of course, for anyone that doesn't believe this, will find that ridiculous. But when I have contact with it, I was very clearly putting myself into a witnessing mode to feel what I was feeling independently of me in the experience. And I felt an incredible clarity opening up. I can explain away all that, but I felt that reality embedded in that moment, and where you feel that expansiveness and clarity, and also what's absolutely striking is the non-intellectualness of it. There's no intellect at all. There's no thinking about it. As you well know, there's no detailing of it. There's that classic ineffable thing, which by its definition is beyond words, and there's a good reason why it's beyond words, because they're clumsy attempts to point to something else. So when you're talking about the lung, I'm thinking, I'm not saying that I know it's very, very detailed in the meridians, but I'm thinking about singing and sound associated with that, and the way that those forces activate the connection, the higher connection, in particular song or sacred or chant, and you've talked about incantation and sound, and I can hear this sound in when you recited earlier on that confirmation bit, explaining the nature of sacrifice and offering, etc. And it also brings me back to that channeling idea. Now you're presenting your version channelled, which also ties into the idea of prayer, because a lot of people consider prayer as petition, as asking for something. And of course, a lot of prayer is an opening up of a channel, as far as I can understand it. And by definition, if you're opening that channel, or if you're committing to a channel to the divine source, as opposed to, or the Tao, or the Buddha, or the Pure Land, or the whatever, the higher, I'm talking about the higher things and not some lower level things, then by definition that channel is a two-way process. And a lot of people are, in Protestantism in particular, there was an idea that prophecy had stopped at a particular stage. It was going to be no more. That was all in the Bible, and therefore, in some elements of Protestantism, that the influx of the Holy Spirit wasn't as important. It's only in some of them. That's a generalization. I wouldn't make it too wide. But this idea of a living input, a living intervention, which is the basis of all mysticism, and is also supported in the Gospel of John, this idea that Philip K. Dick was very interested in, the author of the Paraclete, of the Spirit of Truth. And the Spirit of Truth is something which is external. It's not something that you may come to it, but its primary source is external. That the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of Truth. Is the same as conscience. It's something that's it's in God, if you like, or I suppose if you're like William Butler Yeats and you're in the magical tradition, they talk about a great mind. I don't like the word mind. I think it's too limiting, but they believed in a similar process. It's a two-way process. So would you see channeling, as you described, in terms of prayer, or as a function, or as prayer?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. It's like when people are going through, this new age stuff, I feel this emotional content and I've got this trauma. They will identify it throughout their body somewhere. Someone will be like, oh, well, where do you feel it? Well, I feel it in my stomach. I feel it in my head. I feel it in my shoulder. When you are in prayer, it cannot be equated to anything more than it feels like a laser beam the size of however much mass you take, coming down from above, from the heavens, saturating your physical body. And there's no second guessing that. There's no in between. There's no maybe it's this, that, or something else. Now, a lot of people, when they do channeling, they're a little bit diluted. There's this, the information's kind of, I'm trained to read auras and things. I teach people how to do it. It's not that difficult. But they get information coming from below, from the sides, their mind themselves. It's a consensus. A million times over, you can ask anyone who's truly tuning themselves in prayer. It's not coming from any other direction than the heavens. And you will experience it that way. There's no it's no diluted state of potential. And you'll know immediately. And that prayer is like a gateway to being present, a gateway to speaking the truth of the now, which happens to be God, Buddha, Tao. And you'll know it. It's a visceral thing. And it's not a sensation. It's a feeling. There's a big difference between those two, which is what a lot of people come to me. They've got an energetic potential. That I had the Kundalini awakening. I had this. I'm like, okay, so you're gravitating and hovering and all this kind of good stuff. Oh, what would you like me to help you with? Well, I need to make sense of it. You see that, and that's just a fleeting moment. It's a sensation. It's not a feeling. It's not a knowing. And this is where people get deluded. They take a pill, they take something, they have an apparition, they have an out of body thing that they're this new age sort of way to access the psychedelic sort of like knowing, and then it's gone. They open a gateway and it's gone. It's open and closed. It's not a permanency. It's a transitory thing. When you are attuned and you return to who you are and you have a knowing, that never closes. Once it's opened in this lifetime, it never closes. It only gets stronger and stronger and stronger, that connection. And the simplicity of prayer is the very diluted passing comment from someone who does not or has not experienced what we speak of. That's the only way you would have someone speak about prayer that way, is because they've had the sensation of many different things: drugs, alcohol, sex. They haven't had the feeling and knowing of God. And that comes in that absolute when it comes to the prayer. And once that's turned on, the infrastructure, the energetic potential is like it only gets greater and greater and greater and greater. And I think that's the part that people get misdirected on, is the difference between sensation and feeling and knowing from that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. What strikes me as you're saying that is, and this is the thing, if I look at good writers on the Sufi tradition or Islam, I can learn a lot about my ways from people that have, and this is the benefit and the necessity, and it may have been that it was meant to be in the multiplicity of the Tao or of God, that there be these competing systems that could begin to correspond because they each bring their own genius with a different thing to the table. Like Taoism brings in particular a sense of nature that's been lost. We see a similar thing in indigenous theology, but not a lot of people know about indigenous theology. It's been quite fragmented and inaccessible to many people, and is kept in small things. So it's never become as or got as much purchase as Taoism potentially has because of its history. And so it strikes me that when you're talking about from your tradition about prayer, that can be very useful to other people in different traditions, and this is where we get the synergy that's going to happen as well, that we begin also to see the similarity. And what you're saying there is a thing that I try and say to people simply, but it's a thing that they may not understand when they approach it, like as if they are a stalagmite building up from the ground, that they have to have the stalactite coming down from the top in order to connect with it. You cannot have something else. It will be something else. So your aspiration has to be to the highest. Now, there's problems in saying what the highest is, but in the traditions, there's some conception of what it is or what it's not. And the best we can do is to align to the mystery at that. But people don't want the mystery. They want answers. And this is what the interesting thing of a lot of the new movements is we will give you an answer, total answer. There it is. This is the explanation. It happened in 4 or 5 London, and they came on a ship, and then they did this, and then genes and all that kind of stuff, and you're going to do and that. Or here's the sensation, and you see the mechanical elves and all this kind of stuff, and oh yeah, now I understand the words difference, all kind of, and all the things they were telling me is wrong, and etc. But you may not be going anywhere. You may be merely going into a foreign land that you don't return from. And the Evelyn Underhill, the traditions of mysticism, people that really studied these things, warn against these zones that people are saying is the epitome of a superior religious experience. And there's also a danger in some of the ideas of where you go to or how you recur, because they can confuse different recurrences, different influxes of spirits with the totality of their soul. And I think in the perennial traditions, the submission, as it's called, people misinterpret that, but the submission, the same in Christianity, in Islam, in Taoism, in Buddhism, is to the highest. It's not to somewhere here or somewhere here or something even that's persuasive or some. It's to the highest force, which is difficult to interpret, to keep one's eye on, and it's certainly difficult to understand. And it's certainly difficult to understand in words, because if it had been cracked in words or crackable, it would have been cracked by now. And now we're facing the idea that artificial intelligence is going to create God. They really believe this. And this, of course, is the simulacrum. This is the matrix. This is the new generatrix, the new mediatrix, if like media. So the Virgin Mary again is the mediatrix in between God and humans in like the Pontifex, which of course is the media in the other context. The media is a medium to something else, and the something else is the death of the spirit. It's a connection to this mechanical automaton. So even that conception of trying to connect to the highest and not being deluded, because of course the idea of the simulacrum is also in the spirit world. It's where the spirits appear to be shining angels, and this is the problem in relation to the idea of Lucifer and the idea of something which was shining. By definition, ideas of Satan and Lucifer were fallen angels. This is the same in it's the same in Islam. It's in the Quran about fallen angels. So if the fallen angels, they have intelligences and all that could be consistent with it could be consistent with a person perceiving that they are actually the ultimate force, and they can be misled on that. So it's always critical to have an eye on the highest thing, which again gets into the domain of nothing and gets into something which is mysterious. And the desire for certainty becomes a negative, and that's again in the Tao Te Ching in relation to something which is beyond, to something which is beyond description. Something that what it's pointing to is pointing away from the idea that I can tell you the meaning of life. I can tell you what happened. I can tell you that there was this ancient civilization. And the implication, I was having this discussion in a talk I did recently. I was saying that the implication of, say, all the Graham Hancock books, etc., is that these were fantastic civilizations. They were great. It was fantastic. This civilization that was undersea, it was really, really wonderful. But in most cases, these massive civilizations collapsed because they were in control of slave populations. They were imperial powers like that we have today. So the idea that they are ones that we should emulate, despite the fact that they had great technology, is not necessarily the answer that we should perceive or interpret or extrapolate from there. The answer is consistently what the traditions say, is that you have to put spirit first, and then you can have your things, and then even your society may be better. And I mean, in the European context, there's no doubt, and there's better studies now that explain that really a lot of the basis of the positive things of capitalists, or the creative bit, were because of the high trust society based on this set of rules which enabled people to make or to have expectations about society, how it behaves. You take them out, and you don't have the foundation. There's a few thoughts on I don't know what you think of that pointer.
No, I mean it reinforces this understanding of the simplicity that we speak of, being childlike in your nature, accepting everything at face value is what some of the what I would perceive more aware, more conscious, spiritually conscious gurus would refer to. And that's the present moment. That comes right back to accepting accept and allow all things, which is a Taoist model of understanding. And so we're not going into the intellect. We're not thinking. If you're not thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. It's the first red flag. If you've got to process anything, you are in a point of manipulation under the guise of your personality determining what is the outcome. The selflessness, the servitude does not come from that. You don't have to even process anything. It just is. You've never once had to sit there and help someone who's fallen, because that is your instinct. That is your knowing. The empathy for another human being that is in need is the very driving force of who you are. Now, someone that would be removed from that and be deluded and controlled would pause and potentially not even consider helping someone who's fallen. And you look at that person, and there are those people that are the fraction of a percent that are commandeered, that have the parasites, that are manipulating the world, that are evidence of evil, that people go, well, how can child molesters exist, serial killers, murderers, all these types of people, because this is the very detachment that we speak of. Only 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was perhaps a very small percentage. But now we're seeing quite clear evidence that that fraction of a percent is turning into a percent, turning into double digits, turning into a part of society that is truly disconnected from humanity. And it's part of that journey, part of the prophecy that you speak of, part of the greater picture. And we're here as the spiritual warriors, the truth tellers, to have people return to that. Because when you have an absolute truth, which everyone believes is their truth is the only truth, that absolute truth is reflectant within that ability to be selfless. That's the absolute truth. To be selfless, to be in service. That is the only absolute truth. Everything else is manipulated in veils of dogma and scripture and alterations and manipulations and all this other nonsense that comes with the diabolical side of being a human being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It reminds me of another point, which I've heard a lot recently by people who are, well, this is another kind of characteristic. They're spiritual, but they don't believe in God, or they don't believe in it. I mean, this is a quite common,
right?
Right. And so I'm arguing for spiritual consciousness, but I also argue that spiritual consciousness is a reflection or fractal or hologram of the divine thing, and that's a fundamental part. So I can't see it. I don't think that spiritual consciousness is an epiphenomenon. It's something that happens, it's something you squeeze out, it's some accident. It's not just a thing or a disposition. So, and an argument which is very common in this spiritual but non-godlike, and I don't maybe God in the widest sense, including the Tao or the Buddhism, in the sense of this all-embracing mother of all things, in the sense of that. So I don't see any of that, but there's a spiritual consciousness, and the spiritual consciousness can exist without this in some way. So a common argument I've heard a lot recently, just listening to various people talking, is that, oh, well, if there was a God, well, they would intervene in this and they would not let this happen. No, it's quite remarkable. And it's made as a series, and they take particular instances and say, well, that proves that God doesn't exist. Whereas in relation to growth, if there is any sense of free will, if free will exists in the universe, we cannot have a controlling force. In fact, this is the model of the control of the nervous system, where they do actually control. Oh, you're going to do bad things, we're going to stop you. This is a Clockwork Orange idea. That was we control by medical means. This is other behaviorism. So And it's interesting, even in science fiction, in Star Trek, you had the Prime Directive. And the Prime Directive was that when they came to a society, they couldn't interfere. They had to when the ship traveled to a different, less progressive scientifically, but they were not allowed to interfere with it. So even in science fiction, there's an understanding that the interference inappropriately by a higher force is wrong, because like with a child, they have to learn some ways, they have to learn the hard way. So I mean, there's very, very good reasons why you wouldn't have intervention, although that's not to exclude the universe, Tao, God, intervening, or the apparitions, because the veil between the supernatural, natural, or the openness to persuasion or suggestion is always available in the mystic tradition. And there was a critique I often have. Now, I was just thinking that I have to ask you this question, because I'm not critiquing you in this way, but another feature of this lost world scenario on all the planets is an exoticism. It's an appeal to exotic. It's something which is not ordinary. So because it's not ordinary, it's great. You know what I mean? It's all about, oh, there's all these, it's fantastic. And the exotic is more sellable. You can sell it. Oh, there was these guys and they were, beep, beep, beep. And oh, yeah, that's interesting. So, but as I was thinking about that question, or at that point in our discussion, I'm thinking actually, in some ways, it's not for me, because I identified with the Tao as well when in smoky Dublin in the 1970s. So I mean, I could identify with and recognize that. But in many ways, it could be said that I don't remember you talking about this, is about your coming to to Taoism, to the initial thing. In many ways, probably from your background, was exotic, if you like, from the time and the way that you came to it. So I was interested in that, you coming in the starting point. If you'd care
Yeah.
to,
I mean, the starting point is you look at it, and
and
everything
specifically for you in your journey.
right. Yeah, you look at it, and there are stepping stones right from my initial near-death experience when I was a young boy, hit by a car, and I should have died. It was like there's a clear head-on. The bike went under the car. I flew up in the air. I literally experienced out of body, the fear of death. I had this incredible out of body experience, and I returned to a body that had barely even been brushed or harmed in any way, when I should have gone under the wheel, the front wheel, and all is done. And so from that point, there was a level of realizing my imagination, being, parented by a single parent, my mother. And so the imagination came into play quite deeply in my affinity with Asian culture.
art,
Specifically Chinese culture, started at a very young age, and it had me obsessed with Chinatown, Chinese culture, martial arts, and I got into a lot of that, and also this physicality, the material brute force that you can contain with that yang energy. So throughout my whole teenage years, I was obsessed with bodybuilding and powerlifting. It took me to this awareness of this voice in my mind that would tell me to go to whatever was next. It's like, okay, if you listen to this, this will happen. And the outside information was my mother telling me, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. And do not be dissuaded by other people attempting to bring you down, because I think I had a very interesting childhood, because I was never really accepted high gamma sort of child that absorbed information very quickly. And most children thought that was very weird, and they wanted to punish me for that. And that's what bullying is, right? And most people today have experienced it. I had a lot of it as a child, and I expressed it through building this strength through powerlifting and bodybuilding, getting involved in that. And then from that point, as a teenager, late age, I had this voice telling me, look, you're doing this crazy stuff with your physical body. You need to stop. You can't continue, or something bad is going to happen to you. And I'm like, okay, so what do you, I'm like having this dialogue with myself. Well, what does that really mean? Find meditation. And in those days, meditation was Hare Krishnas and, yogis and, I mean, we're coming into an era that just sort of preceded, the Beatles in the 60s and 70s, the Yellow Submarine, all this kind of psychedelic stuff. And the idea that, the Dalai Lama and Gandhi and all this type of like Eastern philosophy, which is what it was, but it was turned into cultish. Like Hare Krishna in those days was really perceived as a cult, like sort of like following. It wasn't really embraced as some way to raise your consciousness. So it was like, get into the idea of your mind. And so pursue meditation. And I'm like, having the dialogue with myself, there's no way that's going to happen. I pick up things, I crush things. I can't sit in the lotus position. I was a big gorilla, muscle bound. And I'm like, there's no way I could do that. So I've started looking for ways to be taught this. You don't have the internet in those days. So I was like, I found a class that was being handed out a freebie at a local rec center. So I went to it, and I'm thinking, this is in a ghetto, bad neighborhood. I turn up to this thing, this little 50-pound woman, little Asian woman. She was offering these classes as a grandmaster. She's a grandmaster of Qigong. And I'm like thinking, I don't know whether that's, I had to get here. I had to risk my life. Getting into the building, I'm hearing screaming, dogs barking, ambulances, just a bad neighborhood. And I'm sitting there hunched over, attempting to put myself in a lotus position, because that's what they said you do for meditation, right? I look around the room, there's half a dozen misfits like myself begging for a bone. It's like beggars can't be choosers. It's a freebie. I don't know what meditation is. This woman is supposedly going to teach me that. This is the open mind that I have, right? And I'm like, I had a sort of, at a certain point, at a defeatist sort of attitude, like, this is not going to work. I can't do it. My back is hurting. I'm in crouched over. It's not going to happen. And all this noise is going on in the background. And I'm thinking, I can't even focus on anything. How am I supposed to get into this thing that they call stillness? You're going to get into stillness, right? And so I'm sitting there in pain, hearing all this stuff around me, this little 50-pound woman standing in the middle of this room with half a dozen people surrounding her in a circle. And she goes, now all I want you to do is listen to my voice. And I'm like, and it went from listen to my voice to watching her go. And it was dead silence, James. And it went from ambulances to nothing. It's strange the ambulance is driving past me right now.
Yeah.
But it went to nothing. Yeah. And I'm like, holy shit. I used other expletives. But my eyes were open. I wasn't all, wrapped up and fuzzy and calling in my guides and all this. I instantly accessed this power that I've never experienced before in my life. That I can stop time, what I perceive as time, this ability to access that. Now, little did I know that's what I was doing as a young boy all the time, instantly being able to focus, access information. I could literally take books that are this thick and literally put my hand on it. And what I would do is just like flip through it, and I'd gain information from the book that was relevant. on page 47. Then I'd go back to class, and they'd ask a question or do whatever, and I'd have absorbed all of it. And so that took me to pursuing a teacher. And I had a teacher back when I was younger that I wanted to learn martial arts from. And that was a learning curve in of itself. So one of my friends from school said, I have my father teaches martial arts. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I've got bullies. I need to protect myself. And she took me back to her house one afternoon, and her father's there, another small Asian guy. And he kind of looked, I mean, I guess if you had to really look at him, it probably looked a little bit like Bruce Lee, had the whole hairstyle, the whole deal. And I'm like, I want to learn martial arts. He's like, okay, sit down. Here's a piece of paper and a pen. And he goes, and I'm sitting there going, no. I don't think you understand. I want to hurt people. Let's get into, and he's looking at me like, sit down, paper and pen. And I'm like, this is almost like some kind of cheeseball out of literally a kung fu movie. Like it started to, I'm like, no. And he goes, all right, stand up. I'm like, I was a pretty big kid. At this point, I was like 13, 14. And the guy's like, stand up. And so I'm towering over him, and he's like, hit me. I'm like, I'm looking at my friend. I'm like, I'm not hitting your father. I'm going to hurt him. It's like not going to happen. Now, what I did notice was this guy had palms the size of baseball bats. Mitts, thick, very, very thick. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. He goes, hit me. No, I'm just not going to. I'm not going to do it. And my friend's like, yeah, go ahead. And he goes, listen, I'm not going to teach you unless you attempt to hit me. Okay. So I just wound up my back leg, and I didn't go to hit him. I thought I'll just sideswipe him. I've seen it in the movies. And I went to kick his leg, and he was just standing there, and I thought I broke my freaking leg. I was in so much pain. I rolled over in pain. I thought I broke my leg. And he stood there. He looked down at me. He goes, you're not ready. Pen and paper. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. Yeah. I walked back up. I sat down, and I did that for about 2 weeks, and I realized it's not in me. I don't have it. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not looking forward to it. I come home from school. I go to this guy's house, and this is like something out of a kung fu movie, and it's not working for me. So that was my brief capture. Like the intelligence per se, the God Tao was pulling me in this direction. And then, I get to that point where I do the meditation class, first time I've ever done it. And then that was it. I was like pursued the magic, mystical path, because it has to be presented to you in a way that it makes you want to expand yourself.
Yes.
Go ahead.
There's Edgar Casey had this ability to read, to sleep on the books and to assimilate the information. It's an interesting skill. And as you were talking, of course, we have to remind people that Bruce Lee was very informed by spiritual principles, and he used to be like water and quote the Tao Te Ching.
He had a Taoist teacher.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand as well that he was heavily influenced by Krishnamurti in relation to his technique. And this is another crossover in relation, as I was talking about. There's actually a number of very good martial artists or prize fighters who draw on spiritual leaders. So what he drew from Krishnamurti was that there was no one technique. That was a particular direct application of Krishnamurti, who was very, very against being, taken any one particular path, and he directly cited what Krishnamurti had articulated in spiritual terms for his real world terms. So this is the interesting example, or these are interesting examples. So what happens in the spiritual world can be based on higher spiritual principles. And this is the same idea with evil in relation to the principalities were not ruled by flesh and blood, but by the principalities. So the principalities influenced that princes that seek to rule us. Always, even during the Reformation, it was the princes that took over. Even during the supposed dominance of the Catholic Church, there was princes that were taking over the church. There was always these set of groups, and of course, we have the ultimate prince of darkness. The prince is similar to Prometheus. They're not the gods, but they want to be. They want to be the king, but they're never going to be the king. So therefore, they're spiteful. It's a classic archetype. So a person listening to you now is going to say, well, how would you distinguish, if I can guess in what they were, when you talk about meditation and you talked about prayer, where do you see, because for somebody that doesn't understand, where would you see the boundaries, crossovers, or what's your emphasis in relation to the terminology of meditation and prayer? And they're often overlapping, so it depends on.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, there's a meditation is drawing your attention and focus, your ability to focus and expand from that. And prayer is none of that. Prayer is, you are just now. You don't have any processes. You're not thinking about what the outcome is. You're just being. And there is nothing even remotely like that on planet Earth that you could even come close to unless you access it. And so you know the difference. Meditation is you sit down, I'm going to calm myself and think about my breath. And, when you instantly tune to prayer, which is basically your now moment to God, there's no in between. And so that channel becomes greater and greater. We go back to the channel, it becomes greater and greater and greater. And it's instantaneous, as it should be, because everything is now. And so when people meditate, they're contemplating something. And so they work a process. I always remind, method is very important in relation to cultivation or alchemy, yet meditation is still commandeering your attention. You don't have it within prayer. You just are this, you just now. And you will feel it. It won't be a sensation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just because and you used the word which was on my mind again in relation, because you have this dichotomy and in all of these processes, because we're talking about dynamic processes and poles. And again, for people that don't really have a tradition and they're coming out, they hear a lot of different things, and it's the thing that we're pointing to is difficult to get hold of, before what they're or how they conceptualize it. So you did have a very strong tradition of meditation and contemplation in Catholicism, which is, and things like divine readings, and that also goes back to the question about the significance of the image. Why, and your point about ritual, about the different methodologies, because in many senses, many types of meditation seem to be the cultivation of notionally of non-contemplation, and the idea of iconography, of rituals, of visual or systems, invite contemplation, invite and the link between them. I mean, ultimately, we'd say they're circular, but we're talking about a dynamic yin yang also in the processes, because often for me the contemplation method is the method to dispose of the thinking in order to get to this intuition, the higher intuition. You have to, for me, open yourself up by exposing yourself to the range of bits and pieces that are in the mosaic, in order then to begin to make yourself open to the forms that are above, or the place of forms. But I think some of these basic things are difficult for people in relation to, because they think there's some mysterious big thing which is overstates what the simplicity or the naturalness of the process. Not oversimplifying, but in relation to what it is in the first place. I don't know if that makes sense to.
Oh yeah, I mean, it moved from that meditative experience I had to acquiring the version of the Tao Te Ching, to immediately having the second I put my hands on that and I read the first verse, the words came off the page, swirled around me, and dropped right into my heart center, and made me oscillate and reverberate and vibrate at a level. It was just, that was it. And then everywhere I would turn, everywhere I'd look, I would see the yin and yang symbol. It just continually.
Oh, yeah, that was a good description of it. I mean, what I could feel when I was, what I perceived when I read it first was the ghosts whispering from China a few thousand years ago, yeah, as if they were alive and happy, and that jolliness. This is another feature that when or people that in Ireland, and most of them would have been Catholic, but they were Catholic in a very close to the earth way. It was really more of a syncretic or a syncretist system, the way you had this system outside, which was joined with the pagan close to the land system. So it was very 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 close to the Chinese stuff, in my view. Very open, spiritually open, accepted things as they are, and that disposition you find in the Taoists, when, well, it could be this, it could be that. That was embedded in the system. But there was also a kind of jolliness in the face of the universe that came from there, and it comes through Taoism very very clearly for me. And that's the same thing I saw in the real people that really believed in this. You could, in a childlike way as well, this jolly feeling that comes through. So there's something, and there's a transcendent quality to proper joy, and that comes through. But yeah, your description was a good thing. If we're talking about true insight, which is recorded, and we sense it, then it works in that way. And this is a thing that people forget about, because sometimes if you look at the early scripts, they're often illuminated, so they're a lovely art as well. And sometimes the different senses can be engaged before actually the printing press and the Protestant Reformation in particular reduced all the other elements to the word, which was abstracted from context. The word has a different context, and actually the logos, as in the beginning was the logos, being the Greek word for word, was one of the words that they thought was the best translation of the Tao initially. When they were discussing it in the 1700s, they were saying, well, this must mean the logos. Then that was the nearest concept they could come up with initially, as for when I was looking at some of the stuff. So yeah, there is a feeling. So the childlike nature, I think, comes through a lot of these traditions. It can't take itself too seriously, and you see that even in the saints, they can't take themselves over seriously all the time. There's very serious things, but then that doesn't lead to necessarily the sternness. That childlike thing, a sense of humor mainly at the futility of things around, or the attempts to control the Tao, because you can't do that. You can accord with it, you can come into resonance with it, but you can't project your little mind onto the control, and which is the the flaw of the Promethean man. So it is funny, you know, when people are trying to do so. So yeah, that sense came from me through it. And the other thing, as Swedenborg talked about, when God appeared to him and he changed his life from a great scientist to a mystic, the main message was that the Bible had different layers of meaning. Everything had different layers of meaning. So, for example, the creation of the world in 7 days also referred to the 7 chakras, and there's all this different type of things that you say, well, hold on a second, you know, that's something that's never taught. You know, this mode of reading sacred scripture as well means also that you've looked at something all your life, and then you come back to it at some stage and say, oh, I understand that. It's so simple, but I didn't get it. Ye are the salt of the earth. What does it mean? I mean, read through the descriptions of that by the most learned people and look at what they've said about that means ye are the salt of the earth. And most of them just don't get it. And sometimes the deepest meaning is missed on these things, and they remain to be interpreted. These, whether people think they're mythologies or whether I think that they're real, the confluence of myth and reality happens. You know, some things are stranger than, you know, truth is stranger than fiction in many senses, but the layers of interpretation remain to be explored. There's many bits of the story that we may be able to only understand with a different perspective. As I said, I think a proper comprehension of the Tao Te Ching does apply, or would enable you to see some of the meaning, the spiritual meaning of in relation to the Virgin Mary, as I sought to explain. So really, there's a cross fertilization that brings us back to the beginning, which is and our source and our commonality. And the stronger that gets by mutual respect, perception of mutual interdependence, the synergy that we get from exploring these in an open-minded way, and the tone and attitude that we can evince instead of compartmentalizing things, will be the source of the solution. And then we have the crucible for greater divine inspiration. We create the conditions, as in the Kabbalah, I mean reception in one meaning, to receive, for the Holy Grail to be opened up, for us to have a greater, to be informed. And it may have been that it could only be this way, that there had to be this fragmentation first, so that people could retain certain wisdoms that at a certain point would be necessary to come together in the seven sages of the bamboo grove, or the 7 traditions, or whatever. That it was only then, when it was needed, that they could unite at some level. It doesn't have to distort their tradition, but to bring out of it something that it specially can contribute to a new synergy, a new kind of efflorescence, or a new emanation, a new stage of spiritual evolution.
It's it never, I mean, for you and I being seekers, it's always just the beginning. It's never a story that I've heard too many times. It's never an experience that I've had too many times. It's as if it happened for the first time, and that's something that I think refers back to that childlike state that makes it so precious, and the value of it. It's that value, that mutual value between yourself and knowing God, that is the true essence of that journey to come to that realization.
And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about in the seeking, there's also the non-seeking, the reception, that there's a lot of striving, and this, of course, is first principles in Taoism, the non-striving and the effortlessness, and the ability to relax into the openness that enables one to perceive things, to understand our inherent potential is a difficult thing for people, especially if they're coming from a very materialistic, skeptic, rationalistic sense. It's very, very difficult for some people to let go of that in order to engender, encourage what's there already, or to get out of their own way. I think that's a great difficulty, because I have some friends that just cannot in any way conceive that spiritual consciousness as anything but a fabrication of the mind. I don't see anything beyond, the power structures is about manipulation, emotions, and that there's nothing at the center of any of the things. So there's a fair few people have been convinced by the techno-scientific, ultra materialistic philosophy. Now, granted, that's changing a lot. I see a lot of change in the scientific community, which I've had some contact with in the last few years, which I didn't think I would do, but it was necessary for me to do so in order to not be talking rubbish about what the scientific community actually know, because there's a lot of change, a lot of scientists moving into a post-materialist phase. But the interesting thing here is a lot of them, I can't see the willingness to say, well, this leads us to, for example, there are certain rules that we have to in society. They won't do that. I think there's this idea of spirituality. Yes, okay, we see now the spirituality, but it's merely a description to make the world seem nice, or to more explicable, or to explain the mysterious bit. It's not actually something that should impact in the way people, in rules, and a lot of them won't go there. They're reluctant to say that there's any core principles. Now, again, I understand in the Taoist way, there's an ambivalent, because you have to be careful that you can't have rules and get rigid, because it's not going to work. But also there are implicit rules. But I suppose the rules are meant to come from your disposition internally in this confluence of, or constituency of, perception of self-interest in affinity with heaven and earth. But I suppose, but that's the great challenge actually so the challenge for the people that are moving, especially the very intelligent scientific people, will be to explain how the world should work, because you can easily have a very open-minded spiritual sense and then adopt a vehicle in the real world which is not related to that in any way, which is inconsistent, which has certain other consequences. So this perception of the, if you want to call it religious, the binding aspect or consequences, is a real challenge, I think, for those people that have left the materialist paradigm.
Yeah. I mean, it's come across it every day. You're, just start with science, physiology, psychology, neurology, biology. You're limited. It's just one lens that keeps you in a certain side of the fence. But yes, most people within the physicist science community would believe they have the answer. That's it. You don't need God. Yeah. I can give you the numbers. The binary code is the answer to all things. And
but even the ones that like the Tao of physics and books say, yeah, okay, I understand that. As far as I remember, he was very reluctant to. A lot of those are people that are disposed towards that, reluctant to go further and say, well, this has an impact in relation to how I conduct. It's something in the brain. It's something in a world view, but it's not necessarily something that becomes that concrete into the world in a way which is in favor of the religious practice. They say, okay, well, this has some meaning. This means something. This means that you do this, you don't do that. There's a lot of people want the sensation of spirit without the boredom of the conveyance of the reality into the real world. I mean, that this is a great challenge as well, and they see this as mental, the spiritual thing, and that out there as political. Sometimes, there's often a great disjuncture. They don't seem to cohere the inner and the outer world. So I think that's the great challenge for people that are newly awakened to some kind of realistic form. So there's a lot of sense of what Kripal talks, the religion of no religion, but it becomes a self-erasing phenomenon also after a certain stage. There has to be some consequences somewhere of a natural law. There has to be some thing, some principle that one has to ultimately stand by somewhere, or it's just a mental kind of gymnastic activity that one does, So
yeah, I mean, the cycle of spirituality, atheism, religion. I mean, back when I was a kid, it used to be the atheist. Now it's the nihilist. I mean, it just goes to there's nothing. Nothing exists. Nothing is of value. Nothing is greater than, my mundane 9 to 5 job, and then I die. That's life.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of younger people were convinced by that selfish gene, convinced by that nihilism, convinced by that material atheism and the fundamental atheism, and that was very successful part of the mind machine, and it's successful ousting of spirituality and connection with the divine. So that really worked on a generation, and I think there's a lot of negative consequence of that. But yeah.
Well, this has been an awesome little get back together, my dear friend. I've missed you tremendously, and you and I, our void of time and space, literally. I don't know what time it is. Probably midnight, 1 o'clock where you are. I'm not sure what.
I don't have a clock here. I have it somewhere, but I don't know where it's gone to. But,
yeah. But we always get together, and it's just an incredible meeting of spiritual consciousness, and I'm very grateful for you sharing this with me.
Well, thank you, San, for that. Thanks for your version of the Tao Te Ching, and I did definitely feel a synergy of my own thoughts in reading your book, in being able to put it in conjunction with a philosophy, religion, spiritual tradition that I know have some sense of, but appreciate it being expressed on a higher level from someone who's intimately involved in it. And I think there's a lot to be said by focusing or by through these dialogues to try and really focus on the key issues, so that when they become centers of attention, we can begin to really learn what the solutions are, what from different traditions they're pointing to answers for us, they're waiting for us, and that we can crack them open because we need to evolve. So useful your description of concepts of selflessness and the discussions about the nature of sacrifice. I think they're important things, or care. These are critical issues, and I think everyone has to think about them. And they're so familiar that they don't sound like there's anything deep in it, but they're really the crux of where we are. And these are the kind of secret things we need to open up in order to deal with the big issues. And so I found it useful to talk to you as always. So good luck to you, and it was a pleasure to talk to you, and I enjoyed the experience. So thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to doing it again in the future. And we want
Yes.
I'm going to have you've just released another book. Are you writing one? What
it should be out very shortly. Yeah, it's about trying to explain to people how they're going to be controlled. How the idea is to establish global governance, which controls your nervous system directly. So there's no issue about democracy. There's no issue about rights. It's just turn you into an automaton by pointing to some of the philosophies, the political agendas, the programs, and the particular methodologies that are available and are being implemented to create a cloud, basically, that you are part of. You become a mathematical matrix in the matrix. So I want to make that clear, and also I know I used to teach in international relations as well, and law and governance, and so some of those people are looking and understanding that their model of the world was wrong, and actually some of the things that sound off kilter, out of the ballpark, are actually the truth. So there are people that are opening up to these realities. So I hope if I explain how AI will be used to control you down to the cellular level, that people will at least realize what's happening. And a lot of people say, "Well, I'll take the chip. I'll do it. That's fine. That's grand. You make that choice." But for the other people that don't understand, that don't want to give up their eternal soul, which I believe that they're going to be possessed technologically. That if you believe in the eternal soul, and if you consent to these systems, you're going to have to take the consequence, in my view. And I want to at least explain to them how they're going to do it. So that should be out soon. So
great!
Sure
I'll get everyone
around.
Link that up and look for as much more information, and go and read some of your other books that you published.
Yeah.
And really get to know James, because he's an incredible being, and I'm very grateful to call you my friend.
Yeah, and same to you, Sam, and thank you very much, and appreciate, and we'll talk again. So good luck to you and your family, and hope you keep well and safe.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for spending their time with us. I'm your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.